The very first thing I did after waking up in my second life was end my engagement to Adrian Hale. In my last one, I'd spent years burning myself down to keep him warm. I learned his moods the way sailors learn storms. I fixed what he broke, smiled when he ignored me, swallowed every humiliation because I kept telling myself love was a slow fire. Then I got sick, bedridden, breathing turned into work. And while I was still fighting for one more sunrise, Adrian was already planning a lavish wedding behind my back with Vivian Cross. Their wedding date? The same day as my funeral. So, no, not this time. While Adrian was busy cutting ties with the Hale family so he could chase Vivian and her mother like a loyal dog, I went straight to Hale Manor myself. The old estate smelled like polished wood and power, like a place where promises were written in ink and enforced with blood. Harold Hale, the family patriarch, sat in his chair like a judge who'd never lost a case. He pulled out a brittle yellowed contract, the paper edges curled with age. "Claire," he said, his voice firm but weary, "marrying into the Hale family was your grandfather's dying wish. It's also an arrangement between our families, signed long ago." I read the contract 3 times, slowly, forcing my pulse to stay steady. The wording was clear. It never said I had to marry Adrian. My gaze slid past Harold and landed on the man standing in the shadow behind him, tall, still, a quiet presence like a closed door. "If the wedding is in 2 weeks," I said, lifting my chin, "then I'll marry him." I raised a finger and pointed at Julian Hale. Silence hit the room like a dropped chandelier. Harold's teacup froze halfway to his lips. "Claire, marriage isn't a game. You and Adrian were promised from birth. You grew up together. Everyone knows you were meant to be his wife. How can you refuse him and choose Julian?" Because in my last life, Adrian looked me in the eye, our wedding day, and said, "Since you insisted on marrying me, be prepared for me to never love you in this lifetime." Because even at 60, he would sit alone in his study, staring at the love letters he wrote Vivian when he was young, letters he never stopped worshipping, while I stood in the hallway like a ghost in my own home. Because right before I died, he told me with cold honesty, "If I hadn't promised my grandfather, I would have divorced you long ago and married her. You ruined my life." And then he proved it, with a wedding so grand it drowned out the sound of my coffin closing. I met Harold's eyes without blinking. "The contract says I must marry someone from the Hale family. It doesn't say it has to be Adrian." Julian Hale, Harold's youngest son, born late, raised quiet, had always been a rumour more than a man. In my first life, he left the family after Harold died and vanished overseas. I heard he never married. I remembered him as calm, reserved, too mature for petty games, no tragic obsession, no secret lover carved into his ribs. If I had to marry into this family, I'd rather choose respect than resentment. Harold exhaled slowly. "You make a point, but we still need Julian's answer." Julian stepped forward. His white shirt was crisp, his posture composed, his expression unreadable. For the first time, uncertainty pricked my spine. Had I traded one nightmare for another? His gaze settled on me, steady as stone. "As long as you've thought it through," he said at last, voice low and even, "I have no objections." Harold's face broke into relief. "Good, then the wedding proceeds as planned. 2 weeks. Everything at the Aurora Grand Hotel is already arranged." The doors slammed open. Adrian stormed in like a wildfire with a suit on. His eyes hit me first, full of contempt, as if my very existence offended him. "I'm not marrying her," he snapped, turning to Harold. "Grandpa, this is the modern Sajho. Childhood engagements are feudal nonsense. If you won't let me marry Vivian, I'll never come back to this family again." Harold's palm cracked the table. How many times do I have to tell you, a woman like Vivian, who had a child out of wedlock, has no place in the Hale family? Do you know what my old comrades say about you? You're humiliating us. I don't care, Adrian spat. In this life, I'll only marry Vivian. As he brushed past me, he leaned in just enough to let the poison drip. Go cry to Grandpa all you want. It won't change anything. I'm never marrying you. Give up. He didn't even realize I had. True to his threat, Adrian moved into the staff dorms at the academy where we worked. In the cafeteria, I saw him constantly with Vivian, her floral dresses bright as bait, her smile sweet enough to rot teeth. Colleagues whispered around me, indignation bubbling. It's bad enough Harold brought her in as a substitute. Teacher, one muttered. Now they're inseparable. Anyone would think she's the bride. I just smiled and kept eating. It doesn't matter, because Adrian and Vivian were no longer my story. The house Harold had prepared for us was still in my name temporarily. So I went back to pack. When I opened the door, my things were thrown into the hallway like trash. Books bent, clothes half hanging from ripped boxes. Vivian stood inside, arms crossed, wearing the expression of a hostess who'd already decided she owned the place. "Oh, you're back," she cooed. "I'm so sorry. Adrian asked me and my daughter to move in. There wasn't space, so I put your things out here for now. You understand, right?" My chest didn't break this time. It didn't even crack. I knelt and began gathering my belongings in silence. That silence disturbed her more than any scream. "You're not jealous?" she demanded, disbelief sharpening her voice. "Aren't you afraid? Adrian will marry me instead of you?" I looked up, eyes cold. A dog and its bone. Perfect match. Her face flushed. Tears appeared instantly. Practiced. Precise. Adrian arrived like a summoned weapon. He saw her crying and didn't ask why. He never did. "Claire," he barked. "She only asked you to move out temporarily. Did you really have to bully her, or are you just after Hale money and can't stand losing your meal ticket?" I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't explain. I stood, carried my boxes, and walked out. Behind me, Adrian's voice chased my back like nails on glass. "Claire Monroe, a woman like you will never marry me. I'm not even going to the wedding. You'll be humiliated." A week later, the principal called me into his office. A letter sat on his desk like a verdict. "Miss Monroe," he said grimly, "someone has filed a report accusing you of plagiarism in the teacher's writing competition. Higher-ups are watching." My blood went cold. Every word was mine. "Who did I plagiarize?" He sighed. "They provided drafts and outlines as evidence. Even if I wanted to suppress this, I can't. Take a few days off while we investigate." I left the office numb and saw Vivian waiting outside, a satisfied smile curling her lips like smoke. In that instant, everything snapped into place. My drafts, my notes, the half-packed boxes I'd left behind in the house. No one else could have taken them. "It was you," I said, my voice shaking with rage. Vivian didn't even bother denying it. "Yes, so what? You left your things lying around." She leaned closer, eyes gleaming. "You took my man, so don't blame me for taking your job. If you don't leave, how am I supposed to get promoted from substitute to full-time?" The decision came fast. I was fired. And as I stood outside the academy gates, holding the letter that tried to erase my name, I realized something almost calm. They thought they'd cornered me, but they'd only pushed me to the exact place where my second life truly began. How laughable it was. The real author got expelled from her own work while the plagiarist basked in applause and walked away with a promotion like she'd earned it with her bones. That same evening, Adrian Hale threw a celebration dinner for Vivian Cross at a downtown restaurant. I wasn't invited. Of course I wasn't. Invitations were for people you intended to respect. not for the woman you'd decided to sacrifice to keep another one smiling. So I went anyway. The private room was packed with colleagues, laughter loud enough to drown out conscience. Vivian sat in the centre, cheeks flushed, hair curled, wearing that satisfied glow of someone who'd just stolen a future and convinced herself it was destiny. Adrian stood behind her chair, like a proud husband rehearsing his role. I didn't stop to argue. I didn't beg for a seat. I didn't ask for justice. I walked straight to the table, picked up a full glass of red wine, and poured it over Vivian's head in one smooth motion. The room exploded. Someone screamed. Glass clinked. A chair scraped hard against the floor. The wine ran down her curls, stained her floral dress, dripped onto the carpet like a slow, humiliating bruise. Vivian's face twisted between shock and rage, but before she could even wail properly, Adrian grabbed my wrist and yanked me out like I was an inconvenience to be removed. Outside the restaurant, he shoved me into the hallway, his eyes blazing. "Claire Monroe, are you insane?" he hissed. "It's just a teaching position. Vivian is a single mother. Do you know how hard her life is? Can't you just let her have it? If you still want to marry me, stop making things difficult for her." My blood turned cold in a way that had nothing to do with anger. So he knew. He knew I was the one who had been plagiarized. He knew those drafts were mine. He knew the evidence was fabricated, and he still stood there, scolding me like I'd ruined a child's birthday party. In fact, the more I stared at his face, the more the truth arranged itself neatly in my mind. Adrian hadn't just known, he'd helped her. He'd held her hand through the lie, maybe even taught her where to place the fingerprints so no one would question the crime. I didn't hesitate. My palm cracked across his cheek so hard it echoed off the hallway walls. "Adrian Hale," I said, voice low and steady. "You make me sick. Don't worry, I wouldn't marry you in 1,000 lifetimes." He blinked, stunned, then scoffed, as if I were acting out a tantrum that would pass. In his world, my devotion was a law of nature. He had spent years training everyone to believe I'd never truly walk away. 3 days later, he did something I didn't expect. He came to my old apartment in the crowded tenement block, stepping into the bustling courtyard, like a man who didn't belong among peeling paint and hanging laundry. His suit looked too clean. His expression looked almost careful. "Claire," he started, rubbing his jaw like the slap still stung his pride more than his conscience. "Vivian just wanted to stay at the school so badly that she acted impulsively and took your drafts. I'm here to apologize on her behalf. Not on his behalf, on hers." It was the first apology I'd ever heard from Adrian Hale, and it was for another woman. I leaned against the doorway, silent, letting him taste what it felt like to speak into emptiness. He cleared his throat and forced the next words out. "Vivian's been reported for getting her position through backdoor connections. I admit I pulled some strings, but she has the ability to hold her position, doesn't she?" I laughed once, short and sharp. "Ability? You mean the ability to accept gifts from parents and look the other way when rich kids bully others? You mean the ability to sell fairness for favors?" His face tightened. "If you come forward and confirm she wrote that article and that you plagiarized it, she can stay," he pleaded. "Just this once." The audacity was almost impressive. He wanted me to bury myself so she could stand taller. He wanted me to sign my name under my own humiliation and call it mercy. "Get out," I said, turning my face away. "My wedding is in 2 days. I don't have time for your nonsense." That word landed like a blade. Wedding. His eyes flared with wounded pride, as if my life moving forward without him was a personal insult. "You reported her, didn't you?" he snapped. "Claire Monroe, you're despicable. Let me tell you something. If you help her this one time, I'll agree to marry you." To Adrian, marrying me was charity, a bone tossed to a loyal dog. Unfortunately for him, I had stopped being hungry. The next evening, a close colleague dragged me out for dinner, insisting on a little celebration. Foreigners love their bachelorette parties, she joked. Let me give you one too. I smiled and followed. I even let myself relax for an hour, pretending my life wasn't a battlefield. Then, on the way to the restroom, I heard a familiar voice through the thin wall of the private room next door. Adrian's voice. If it weren't for Vivian, I'd never agree to marry that woman, he said, drunk and shameless. Just looking at her makes me sick. I paused. The hallway lights blurred for a second, as if my vision couldn't decide whether to rage or laugh. I peeked through the slightly open door. Adrian sat with his arm around Vivienne, talking with a devotion so theatrical it made my stomach turn. Don't worry, he murmured. I'll never love anyone but you. Marrying her tomorrow is just to placate my grandfather and keep you in the school. Vivian blushed and leaned into his chest like she'd won a kingdom. Their friends teased them, glassy-eyed and grinning, cheering for the romance of two people who'd built their happiness on someone else's bones. For a heartbeat, something still stung. Not because I loved him, no, that part had died long ago, but because hearing him belittle me so casually reminded me of the decades I wasted believing I could soften stone with my bare hands. I turned away, smiling bitterly to myself. Adrian, your presence at tomorrow's wedding won't be needed. The next day, the wedding at the Aurora Grand Hotel proceeded as planned. Guests arrived expecting Adrian to be the groom. When they realized the man beside me wasn't him, surprise flickered across their faces. But the prestige of the Hale family kept their mouths politely shut. Congratulations were offered with stiff smiles. Toasts clinked with careful restraint. Julian Hale stood beside me in a tailored suit, calm as if he'd been born to handle storms without getting wet. Adrian arrived late. Of course he did, and he didn't come alone. Vivian was on his arm, dressed in a long red gown, bright, aggressive, chosen to steal attention like blood on snow. The scene was so familiar it nearly made me laugh. In my last life, he'd done the same thing, turning my wedding into a public joke, forcing me to swallow humiliation in front of hundreds of eyes. But this time, the joke wasn't on me. Adrian staggered slightly when he saw Julian. His expression snapped into disbelief. "Uncle Julian," he blurted, voice thick with alcohol. "Why are you wearing a groom's suit?" Julian raised an eyebrow, his tone calm, almost bored. "Because I'm the groom. What did you expect me to wear? And you reek of alcohol and you're still in yesterday's clothes. What kind of impression are you trying to make?" Adrian's eyes widened, the colour draining from his face. "What's going on? Isn't today my wedding day?" Harold Hale's cane struck the floor with a heavy thud. His chuckle was cold. "You didn't want to get married, did you? Well, now you've gotten your wish. What are you complaining about?" Adrian spun toward me, fury twisting his features. "Claire, did you trick Grandpa? Did you say something to Uncle Julian? I knew you couldn't be trusted." Julian stepped forward then, placing himself between us with quiet authority. His voice cut through the whispers like a blade through silk. "Claire Monroe is not someone you address so casually," he said. "Based on seniority, you should be calling her aunt." Adrian stumbled back like he'd been punched. Vivienne nearly lost her balance, but her eyes lit up with greedy hope. "This is wonderful," she cried, squeezing Adrian's arm. "If your grandfather isn't forcing you to marry her, then we can finally get married." Her ambition screamed louder than her voice. Harold snorted. "Not just anyone can marry into the Hale family. Adrian, if you want to bring in a woman like her, it'll happen over my dead body." Vivian's face crumpled, tears spilled instantly, As if humiliation had pressed a hidden button, she clung to Adrian, sobbing, "You promised you'd marry me! How can you let your family insult me like this?" Adrian hesitated, caught between lust and legacy, between a woman on his arm and the power behind his surname. Around us, guests began whispering, sharp and cruel, "Isn't that Vivian Cross? Didn't she come back pregnant years ago? I heard her family collapsed because of the scandal. Now she thinks she can climb into Hale Manor." Vivian's face burned red. She stamped her foot, covered her face and ran out. Only then did Adrian seem to wake from his drunken fantasy. Oh. He turned back, demanding, "Why didn't anyone tell me the groom changed? Why wasn't I informed?" Harold's glare could have frozen fire. "I called your school multiple times. You refused to answer. I sent letters. You returned every single one." Adrian stood there, pale and shaking, with nothing left to blame but himself. In the end, he chased after Vivian, and my wedding continued, smooth, dignified, untouched by the chaos he tried to bring. That night, sitting on the bed draped in red sheets, my cheeks still warm from the day's heat, I finally asked Julian the question that had been circling my mind. "Was it you," I whispered, "who reported Vivian to the higher-ups?" Julian nodded once, expression calm. "You married me. I won't let you be wronged again." He paused, then added, "I spoke to the school. If you want, you can return to teaching whenever you're ready." Warmth spread through my chest, slow and real. Yet I hesitated, not because of Adrian, not because of fear. "In my last life, I worked there until retirement," I admitted softly, only to realize I never truly loved teaching. I want to apply to a newspaper instead. I watched his face, bracing for disapproval. Julian simply said, "Do whatever you like. If it makes you happy, go for it. If it doesn't work out, I'm here." Encouraged, I slid my prepared manuscript into the narrow slot of a newspaper mailbox. If it was accepted, it would give me an edge in the interview. Later, walking past a department store, I remembered Julian's wardrobe was basically a sea of white shirts. So I went into a fabric shop, picked out a bolt of clean, elegant cloth, something that would suit him. And that's when I ran into Adrian and Vivian again. Vivian clung to his arm, pointing at the fabric I'd chosen. "This one," she told the shop assistant. "Wrap it up for me." My mood soured instantly. Even the cloth looked dull now, as if her fingers had already stained it. I slipped my coupon back into my pocket, then smiled politely at the assistant. "Give it to her," I said. "Some people only enjoy taking what others no longer want." Vivian bristled. "Don't act so high and mighty. You didn't look so dignified when you were chasing Adrian like a lovesick puppy." I glanced at Adrian, slowly from head to toe, then let a faint smirk curve my lips. "Charming, isn't he?" Adrian's face darkened. "Don't think you're special just because you married my uncle. You only managed it because of that old contract. Vivian is different. She loves me for who I am and doesn't care about my family's wealth." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Vivian's expression flicker, awkward for half a second, before she quickly plastered sweetness back on like makeup. She leaned into him and smiled at me. "We should thank you, Claire. Without you, Adrian and I wouldn't have ended up together. We're family now. When the baby arrives, don't forget to come celebrate." She pressed a hand to her stomach, glowing with fake tenderness. Using her pregnancy like a lockpick, I couldn't help the sneer that slipped out. And here I thought dogs might learn new tricks. Is having a child out of wedlock supposed to be something to brag about? Then I walked past them without another word. True to form, Adrian soon began pestering Harold again, demanding permission to marry Vivian. "As long as I'm alive, that woman will never step into my house," Harold roared, anger stealing his breath. Adrian pushed harder. "It's the modern age. People believe in free love. Besides, Vivian is carrying my child. That baby is a member of the Hale family." Harold's fury boiled over. "A child conceived out of wedlock is nothing but a bastard! How did our family raise someone so shameless?" His cane struck Adrian's leg with a sharp, punishing crack. "If you're so determined," Harold spat, "then get out. Don't ever come back." Adrian was thrown out of Hale Manor, and in the house that had once been prepared for my marriage, he held a small, bitter wedding with Vivian, attended only by his drinking buddies, his pride, and the wreckage of every door he'd slammed in his own face. Adrian had always lived off the respect people gave him for one simple reason: his last name. For years, Hale opened doors before he even knocked. It softened voices that should have questioned him. It turned ordinary opinions into praise, ordinary mistakes into youthful impulsiveness. He mistook that borrowed reverence for real worth, the way a man mistakes a uniform for strength. But the moment he severed ties with the family, the world adjusted, swift, cold, and brutally honest. The staff at the academy no longer rushed to greet him. The shopkeepers stopped smiling. Old colleagues who once laughed at his jokes began replying with short nods, as if he'd become a stranger they didn't have time for. Invitations dried up. Conversations ended faster. Even the air around him felt smaller. And Vivian Cross, Vivian, who had clung to him like he was a lifeboat, started complaining the minute the lifeboat creaked. "How can you call yourself a man?" she snapped one evening, holding up a bolt of fabric like it was evidence in court. "When your teacher's salary can't even buy a decent length of cloth. Look at this. Look at me. I'm pregnant, Adrian. Pregnant. Do you want me walking around dressed like a beggar?" Her nagging didn't fade. It sharpened. It found new angles. It didn't take long before Adrian came crawling back to Harold Hale with his pride in his hands, begging to be let in again. Harold's answer came through a guard at the gate, as hard and final as a gravestone. "You can come back with the child," the guard relayed, expression unreadable. "But that woman will never step through these doors." Adrian stood outside the estate like a man locked out of his own life. The iron gates didn't even creak for him. Not one step, not 1 inch of mercy. While he rotted in the consequences of his own choices, mine finally began to bloom. A letter arrived from the newspaper I'd submitted my manuscript to. I was hired. I would start next month. I held the envelope in my hands and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Lightness. Not the temporary thrill of winning a fight, but the deep relief of stepping out of a nightmare and realizing the world still had mornings worth waking up for. Without Adrian, the city looked brighter, the streets felt wider. Even the wind seemed less hostile. One afternoon after work, I was walking home when I overheard a knot of colleagues gossiping near the entrance. "Have you heard?" one of them whispered, eyes sparkling with scandal, "that the Hale grandson got cheated on?" "Yeah," another hissed, delighted. "The guy was the principal from the school next door, caught in bed no less. And they say when the wife burst in, Vivian and the principal didn't even have clothes on." A smirk tugged at my mouth before I could stop it. Karma had finally remembered Vivian's address. In an era with too little entertainment and too much boredom, the scandal spread like wildfire. The principal's wife, a fierce, sharp-tongued woman, didn't just catch them. She made sure the entire neighbourhood heard every detail. She sat on the floor wailing loud enough to crack windows, narrating the scene like a public trial. Vivian's affair wasn't romance. It was strategy. She was trying to claw her way back into a job. Adrian's salary barely supported her and her daughter, let alone the baby she claimed was his. When survival tightened around her throat, she reached for the nearest connection with a title. The principal's wife called her family. Within an hour, men arrived like a storm. They dragged both Vivian and the principal to the police station. The principal, accused of an inappropriate relationship, was fired before the sun even set. Vivian, pregnant and unemployed, was released after a harsh warning and a brief scolding. But the wife wasn't finished. She marched to Adrian's doorstep and threw buckets of waste at his door. She shouted curses that turned every curtain into an audience. She used every humiliating tactic she could think of, as if she wanted to peel their skins off with shame. Adrian was already drowning in humiliation. Vivian's betrayal pushed his face under. At last, he couldn't take it anymore. He went to Harold again. This time, he knelt. "Grandpa," he said, voice hoarse, head bowed. "I was wrong." Harold's face remained carved from stone, but his hands trembled slightly on his cane. For all his anger, he couldn't fully abandon his grandson. Adrian was allowed back into the family, alone. The alone part was the knife. The estate felt different after that. The air carried whispers. The servants watched with guarded eyes. Even the old portraits seemed to judge him, and every time I passed him, the memory of what he'd done, what he'd said, made the space between us feel permanently poisoned. He approached me one evening, awkward and pale, as if he'd aged 10 years in 10 days. "Claire," he said quietly, "I was wrong about everything. I didn't realize Vivian was that kind of woman." I looked at him for a moment, then answered lightly, "It's in the past." My voice held no heat. Once I might have hated him. Once I might have burned to see him suffer. But standing by Julian's side now, working a job I chose, waking into a life I owned, my anger had evaporated into something colder, indifference. You only hate what you still care about. Adrian swallowed, eyes flicking to the ring on my finger, like it was a wound he couldn't stop touching. He hesitated, then tried to step closer. "I know there's no real affection between you and my uncle. The mistakes I made, let's fix them. You and we were childhood sweethearts. If you're willing to divorce him, I cut him off, like snapping a thread. "Do you think I'm an object?" I said, voice sharp, "that you can summon and discard whenever you feel lonely?" How pathetic. Only after you were abandoned and humiliated did you finally remember I exist. I held his gaze, unwavering. "Adrian, I'm happy now, and who says I don't have feelings for Julian? He's 1,000 times, no, 10,000 times better than you." I leaned slightly closer, my tone turning colder. "And don't forget your place. Next time we meet, address me as Aunt." Then I turned and walked away without sparing him another glance. It was time to discuss moving out with Julian. Living under the same roof as my ex-fiancé, no matter how technically in the family it now was, wasn't something I wanted. I refused to become the subject of cheap gossip. As I rounded the corner, a pair of strong arms pulled me into a warm embrace. "Julian, we'll move out," he said firmly. I blinked up at him, teasing despite myself. "Were you listening?" He didn't answer, but the faint redness on his ears betrayed him as the move went smoothly. Harold, ever understanding, didn't object. But just as the final details were being settled, a shrill voice tore through the gates like a siren. "Adrian Hale, get out here!" Vivian. Her belly was round now, her floral dress strained against her swollen frame, the fabric pulled too tight over desperation. "You're responsible for my pregnancy!" she screamed, half accusation, half threat. "You left me alone and pregnant. Have you no shame? If you don't come out, I'll report you for harassment. I'll barge in if I have to. Let's see who dares stop a pregnant woman." The guards exchanged uneasy looks, but held their ground, blocking her from the estate. When Adrian finally appeared, his face was already boiling with fury. "You dare show your face!" he snarled. "You've been disgracing yourself, and now you have the nerve to come to my family's home." Vivian's laugh was sharp and ugly. "Disgracing myself," she spat. "Everything I did was for our family. Do you think I would have stayed with you if you weren't a Hale? You're nothing but trash cast out by your own kin. If I can't go back to teaching, how are we supposed to survive on your measly salary? Should we starve? Adrian stared at her like a man seeing her face for the first time. No softness, no romance, only hunger. I watched for a moment, then lost interest. Their fight was pathetic. I had boxes to move, plans to make, a life to live. I turned to leave. Vivian darted toward me and seized my arm, nails biting into skin. "This is your doing," she hissed. "You're the reason Harold won't let me into the family." I glanced around instinctively for Julian. He wasn't in sight. A thin thread of panic slid up my spine. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, trying to shake her off. "Let go!" But Vivian's grip tightened, her voice turning venomous. "Seeing me like this must make you so happy. Just because you married Julian doesn't mean you're any better than me. At the end of the day, we're both women who rely on men to climb. If I'm miserable, don't think you'll have it easy either." Her eyes flashed with hate. Then she shoved me, hard. My heel caught the edge of a stone step. I stumbled. The world tilted, and my head slammed into rock. Darkness swallowed my vision. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I saw was Julian's face, drawn tight with guilt, stubble shadowing his jaw, exhaustion in his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. "You're awake," he whispered, voice thick. "I'm sorry. I didn't protect you the way I should have. I swear I'll never let anything happen to you again. Are you in pain? Does your head still hurt?" It was the first time I'd heard him say so much in one breath. I smiled faintly and shook my head as I tried to sit up. Julian shot up instantly, fumbling to adjust my pillow, hand me water, tuck the blanket around me like he could stitch me back together with care. I couldn't resist teasing him. "I just fell. It's no big deal. At worst, I'll have a scar." Julian's face flushed. He hesitated, then finally stammered, You're about to become a mum. You need to take care of yourself." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. My heart raced. "What did you just say?" Julian nodded, again and again, his expression gentle and bright with joy. "We're having a baby." The realization hit me like sunrise. Pregnant, for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was going to be a mother. Happiness surged through me, so intense it felt unreal, like I might wake up and lose it. That bliss was cut by a knock at the door. "Uncle Julian," Adrian's voice called from outside. "I need to talk to her." Julian looked at me, silently asking permission. I gave him a small nod. He stepped out reluctantly. Before the door closed, I caught the edge of Adrian's coat lingering at the corner, like a man afraid of being shut out again. He stepped in, voice heavy with guilt. "Claire, I'm sorry. I never imagined she would hurt you like that." I stayed silent, watching him with an unreadable expression. He kept talking as if words could rebuild what he'd burned. "I know I've hurt you. These past few days, I've been reflecting. I finally realized your worth. But now, it's too late." His confession barely registered. I had already made my decision, and I never changed my mind, especially now that I was carrying Julian's child. Adrian saw my silence, swallowed, and finally revealed the real reason he'd come. "I know you won't forgive me," he said, desperation raw in his eyes. "But I'm begging you, please help Vivian. Grandpa is furious. Her life will be miserable. She's pregnant with my child. That baby is a Hale. Please, Claire, talk to Grandpa for her." He looked broken. He looked pitiful, but pity was not permission. A faint chuckle escaped me, and hope flickered foolishly in his eyes. Then I extinguished it. "Since you're my nephew," I said softly, "I'll give you advice as an elder." I paused, letting the words land like ice. "Get a paternity test, and if that's not possible, maybe you should get your own health checked." Adrian froze, his eyes widened, disbelief crashing over his face. He stammered questions, demanded explanations. I stayed silent, and the more I refused to elaborate, the more terror crept into his expression, like a man suddenly remembering a truth he'd been running from his whole life. At last, he lost all composure and stumbled out of the room like someone chased by ghosts. And long after he left, Julian returned, sat beside my bed, and covered my hand with his, steady, warm, present. Outside, the world continued spinning, indifferent. But inside that room, my second life finally felt like it belonged to me.